Hello everyone, and welcome back to Retro Legends. In the early 90s, the Game Boy had already become a global phenomenon. Nintendo's small handheld console had won over millions of players thanks to Tetris, Super Mario Land, and The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening. Yet something was missing. While RPGs on NES and SNES began to tell complex and engaging stories, the Game Boy seemed destined for shorter, more immediate experiences. Square, rapidly expanding after the success of Final Fantasy IV, saw an opportunity in that black and white console to bring the charm of grand role-playing adventures to your pocket. This is how Seiken Densetsu, Final Fantasy Gaiden, known in Europe as Mystic Quest, was born. A title designed to be more accessible than a Final Fantasy, yet capable of conveying the same magic. A project that, in hindsight, would give rise to one of the most beloved sagas of all time, Mana. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Let's begin. In the early 90s, Square was a game development house in full evolution, but not yet the global powerhouse it would become a few years later. It had found its identity thanks to Final Fantasy, but had not yet established clear boundaries between its sagas. Every new project was a testing ground, a creative laboratory where they tried to understand which direction the future of Japanese role-playing games would take. In that era, the Final Fantasy brand represented a seal of quality, a name capable of attracting attention even to minor titles. For this reason, Square decided to use it as an umbrella for new experiments, while maintaining a certain narrative distance from the main series. Thus was born Seiken Densetsu, Final Fantasy Gaiden, known in the West as Mystic Quest. The underlying idea was simple yet audacious: to transform the epic experience of traditional role-playing games into something more immediate, fluid, and accessible, without sacrificing the emotional and narrative depth that had made Final Fantasy famous. Not a sequel, not a spin-off in the modern sense of the term, but a kind of side branch, a parallel world where the same fantasy archetypes, knights, mages, crystals, and ancient evil forces coexisted, but told with a completely different rhythm. The team wanted to break the rigidity of turn-based combat, replacing it with direct and engaging action. The player no longer had to limit themselves to choosing commands from a menu. They had to feel the weight of the sword, experience the tension of a successful blow or an approaching enemy. A concept that sounded revolutionary at the time, especially because it came from a studio famous for its turn-based systems and the complexity of its statistics. The most obvious inspiration was The Legend of Zelda, which had shown how a heroic adventure could also be told through dynamic gameplay, made up of exploration and continuous action. But Square didn't just want to imitate Nintendo. The goal was to take Zelda's structure and imbue it with the drama and emotional intensity typical of a JRPG. Where Zelda was silent, Mystic Quest aimed to be poetic. Where Zelda focused on adventure, Mystic Quest sought melancholy, tragedy, fate. A Zelda with a Square soul, we could say, more introspective, more narrative, more laden with symbolism. What made the experiment even more courageous was the chosen platform, the Game Boy. In 1991, Nintendo's handheld console was still seen as a machine for short, immediate experiences. Few believed it was possible to tell a deep story on a monochrome screen the size of a credit card. Yet Square wanted to prove otherwise, to create a pocket-sized RPG that didn't feel like a reduced version of a big game, but a complete adventure in miniature. Every element, from narration to mechanics, from music to maps, was designed to work within the console's limitations, but also to evoke something larger, as if the game world extended beyond the edges of the screen. The final result was something truly unique for its time, a hybrid of action and role-playing, where combat never separated from exploration, where every hit and every step contributed to the protagonist's growth. A fluid, uninterrupted experience that broke the traditional JRPG structure to embrace a more direct, more modern language. In a way, Mystic Quest represented the first true fusion of two design philosophies that until then had remained separate. Nintendo's, based on physical interaction and player intuition, and Square's, founded on storytelling, drama, and the construction of complex worlds. The beating heart behind Mystic Quest was Koichi Ishii, a young designer who, though still little known to the general public, had already left his mark on some of the early Final Fantasy titles. He had collaborated on character creation, balancing game systems, and, most importantly, defining the magic that made Square's worlds so alive, almost tangible. But Ishii wasn't just any programmer. He was a dreamer, an author who saw video games as an expressive medium still largely unexplored. For him, the magic of Final Fantasy wasn't in numbers or statistics, but in the feeling of living an epic adventure, of being inside a world that breathed with the player. At the time, the formula of Japanese role-playing games was rigidly codified: exploration, menus, turn-based combat, experience, and leveling. But Ishii wanted to break that routine. He wanted to create a physical role-playing game where the sword truly struck, where movement mattered, where the player wasn't just observing the battle, but was an integral part of it. When he presented his idea to Square's executives, the response was cautious. The company was known for its complex stories and strategic systems, not for real-time action. However, the potential of the concept was evident, and management decided to give him a chance. It wasn't a main project. Final Fantasy IV and other Super Famicom titles had priority, but an interesting experiment, perfect for a portable console like the Game Boy, where accessibility and simplicity were key. So in 1990, Square gave Ishii a blank slate, but with limited resources. The team was tiny, just about 10 people, including programmers, graphic designers, and musicians. Many of them were also simultaneously working on other internal projects, often for the new generation of 16-bit consoles. This meant that Mystic Quest had to be born under conditions of absolute efficiency, making the most of every idea and every byte of memory. Yet, it was precisely this scarcity of resources that pushed Ishii to be more creative. With a small team, he could make decisions quickly, experiment, and change direction without lengthy approvals. The vision was clear: to create a game that was compact yet profound, accessible yet full of meaning. An adventure that could be as exciting as the big RPGs on consoles, yet contained within the monochrome screen of the Game Boy. Ishii and his group imposed a rule on themselves. Every element, no matter how small, had to contribute to the feeling of presence. It wasn't enough to show a sword strike, you had to feel it. It wasn't enough for a dungeon to have enemies. It had to tell a story, evoke an atmosphere, hint at the history of that place through graphics and music. Production was not easy. The Game Boy had severe technical limitations: little memory, black and white graphics, sound limited to 4 channels. But instead of seeing them as obstacles, Ishii treated them as creative stimuli. With the collaboration of composer Kenji Ito, he managed to create a universe that seemed to go beyond the screen's boundaries, made of melancholic melodies, evocative environments, and characters full of humanity, despite their tiny pixel dimensions. Many of Mystic Quest's technical solutions arose precisely from this artisanal approach. For example, managing the isometric view and real-time combat was a huge challenge, which the team solved with a custom graphics engine. Similarly, the ability to use different weapons also for environmental exploration, like the chain to cross ravines or the axe to cut down trees, was Ishii's own idea, as he wanted an interactive world where every object had more than one function. There was also another implicit goal: to demonstrate that Square knew how to innovate. In a period when many Japanese studios were beginning to specialize, Ishii represented a dissenting voice, an author who sought to merge classic RPG with real-time action and an almost cinematic direction. His influences were varied, from late 80s fantasy manga to Studio Ghibli animated films, and even The Legend of Zelda, which Ishii admired not so much for its difficulty, but for its ability to make the player feel part of a living and coherent world. Despite the reduced budget, the atmosphere in the small development studio was electric. At first glance, Mystic Quest seems like a classic miniature fantasy story. A silent hero, a prophecy, a sacred tree, and a world in peril. But beyond that simple fairy tale facade, Square managed to build something much deeper, almost intimate, that went far beyond the Game Boy's technical limitations. The game opens with a somber scene. The protagonist, a young gladiator prisoner, forced to fight for the amusement of Emperor Glaive, a dark lord who rules with fear. There's no glory, no freedom, only survival. It's a stark contrast to the light-hearted tone of many RPGs of the era, and from the very first minutes, it communicates to the player that this won't be a heroic journey in the traditional sense, but a fight for freedom, dignity, and truth. When the protagonist manages to escape and meets a mysterious dying man who reveals the mission to save the Tree of Mana, the tone shifts from adventure to destiny. It's not the hero who chooses their mission, it's the mission that chooses them, a destiny imposed, almost cruel, forcing an ordinary boy to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. From that moment, Mystic Quest becomes a parable about loss and maturation. Every encounter, every ally who joins the protagonist seems destined to vanish. There are no permanent parties like in classic Final Fantasy games. Companions come and go, often tragically. Each one leaves behind a mark, a sorrow, a lesson. It's an innovative narrative approach for the time, and perfectly consistent with Koichi Ishii's vision. Not a story of invincible heroes, but of people who grow through sacrifice. The episodic structure, one companion at a time, one stage at a time, is not just a technical choice, but a powerful emotional tool. Every separation carries weight, and the player soon learns that in that world, nothing is eternal. Even love is destined to end, as happens with the tragic story of Fuji, the Mana Priestess, whose fate intertwines with the protagonists in a poignant way. The entire adventure is built around this constant tension between hope and loss, a balance that few games of the period managed to convey with such force. Despite the Game Boy's graphical simplicity, Mystic Quest manages to evoke a melancholic and almost spiritual atmosphere. The towns are small, but every character has something to say, a fragment of pain or hope. The environments, though reduced to a few monochromatic sprites, convey a sense of emptiness and desolation, as if the world were already partly lost. And Kenji Ito's soundtrack amplifies this feeling with sweet and sad melodies that seem suspended between dream and nostalgia. The game's narrative is surprisingly dark. It speaks of slavery, manipulation, ancient wars, and repeating cycles of destruction. The Tree of Mana, a symbol of life, is not just a goal, but a metaphor for the bond between living beings and nature, a theme that Ishii would later strongly develop in Secret of Mana. The message is clear. Every power, even the purest, can be corrupted, and every sacrifice, even that of the hero, has a price. Ultimately, Mystic Quest is not a story of triumph, but of awareness. The protagonist does not become a hero by choice, but because the world leaves him no alternative. He fights not for glory, but to survive, to honor the dead, to save what remains of Mana. And when his mission ends, the world does not explode in a burst of light. It remains silent, wounded, but alive. An ending that speaks of rebirth, but also of cyclicity, of a fragile balance that must be constantly maintained. This melancholic, almost poetic tone deeply struck players of the era. From a technical standpoint, Mystic Quest was truly a small miracle in black and white. Let's remember that the Game Boy, in 1991, was a machine designed for portability, not for power. It had a monochrome screen, 4 shades of gray, a modified Z80 CPU, and very little available memory. Yet, within those few kilobytes, Square managed to build an entire living, coherent, and detailed world, capable of conveying feelings of adventure and mystery like few other portable titles of the era. The first striking aspect is the structure of the maps. Despite the limitations, Mystic Quest offers a sense of scale that, for 1991, was almost incredible. Cities, forests, and dungeons are connected by an overworld that, though simplified, gives the feeling of traversing a vast, populated, and dangerous world. Each area is unique. Rocky mountains have narrow, irregular paths, dungeons are intricate labyrinths, and villages, though composed of a few buildings, manage to convey personality thanks to small graphical and sound details. The character sprites, simple and stylized, are actually a masterpiece of visual economy. The protagonist, though made of a few pixels, communicates movement, energy, and a clear identity. The way he holds his sword or how he reacts after a hit is enough to define his character. Every enemy then has a distinct design, capable of hinting at its behavior even before the fight. Larger monsters, like bosses, occupy most of the screen and give a true sense of threat, a remarkable achievement on such a small display. The attack and magic animations were among the smoothest ever seen on Game Boy at that time. When the protagonist brandishes his sword, the weapon leaves a luminous trail, an effect achieved with a simple but ingenious trick of alternating frames that conveys a sense of power. Magic, then, uses flashing effects and dynamic patterns to simulate explosions, fire, and electrical discharges, transforming the screen into a small portable spectacle. It's surprising to note how the development team managed to maintain a constant rhythm without downtime or loading screens, ensuring a continuous and fluid action experience, which was extremely rare in RPG titles of that era. The level of memory optimization was also extraordinary. Koichi Ishii's team faced an almost impossible challenge to condense an entire action RPG with story, characters, dungeons, and music into a mere 2 megabit cartridge. To achieve this, the developers used every trick in the book. Many graphical elements were reused with chromatic or arrangement variations. Backgrounds were built modularly to save space, and the game code was written with extreme efficiency. The result is that Mystic Quest not only ran stably, but it did so without visible slowdowns, a remarkable technical feat for the Game Boy's hardware. Another element not to be underestimated is sound management. The Game Boy could only handle 4 audio channels simultaneously, but composer Kenji Ito managed to create a soundtrack of surprising emotional complexity. Each area has a distinct theme, and the melodies, though simple, are constructed in such a way as to immediately evoke the atmosphere of the place. Mysterious for forests, melancholic for villages, solemn and tense for bosses. It was a soundtrack that sounded much bigger than what the hardware could actually offer, thanks to a clever use of frequencies and rhythm. Visually, Mystic Quest exploits the Game Boy's limited palette with exceptional chromatic intelligence. The designers managed to create a clear distinction between environments without ever resorting to color, instead using contrasts of brightness, patterned textures, and object arrangements to add depth. This made it possible to immediately recognize the type of place we were in. A cave appeared dark and grainy, while a city was orderly and bright. Even the backgrounds during battles had nuances and designs that conveyed a sense of movement or tension. Another strength was the management of rhythm. The game alternated exploration sections, environmental puzzles, and real-time combat naturally, without downtime. Each zone had the right duration, and the arrangement of objects and enemies was calibrated to create a sense of continuous progression. It was a difficult balance to achieve, but fundamental to keeping the player's attention on a portable console. Another fundamental pillar of Mystic Quest's success was its soundtrack, composed by Kenji Ito in his first major assignment at Square. Despite the Game Boy's sound limitations, Ito managed to create memorable melodies, rich in atmosphere and pathos. The main theme, with its melancholic and solemn notes, perfectly captured the epic tone of the adventure. The dungeon music conveyed tension, while that of the villages offered a rare sense of peace. Each track had a strong identity, and many of them would be rearranged in subsequent chapters of the Mana series, testifying to their evocative power. Today, the Mystic Quest soundtrack is considered one of the best ever created for Game Boy, a true lesson in composition within tight constraints. The beating heart of Mystic Quest is undoubtedly its real-time combat system, an element that, for its time, represented a clear break from the tradition of Japanese role-playing games. In 1991, most RPGs followed the established turn-based formula. Characters and enemies faced off in separate screens, alternating commands and strategies in a static manner. Mystic Quest, however, swept away this convention and brought the action directly onto the playing field. There was no longer a distinction between exploration and battle. Everything happened in real time, in the same environment, without transitions or loading screens. It was a bold approach that would anticipate the style of modern action RPGs, laying the groundwork for what would become the Mana series formula. Mystic Quest's combat system was surprisingly deep, especially considering the Game Boy's limited hardware. Each weapon had a unique behavior in its own physics, and it wasn't just about differences in damage or speed. It changed the very way you approach the world. The sword, for example, was the most balanced weapon, ideal for close-quarters combat and frontal attacks. The chain allowed you to reach distant enemies or objects, useful for attacking without exposing yourself too much or for interacting with environmental elements. The scythe, on the other hand, had a more strategic role. It was used to cut bushes, destroy obstacles, and open hidden passages. Every time the player changed weapons, their way of interpreting the environment changed. This meant that dungeons weren't just places to explore or clear of enemies. They were true environmental puzzles, built around the protagonist's abilities. The genius of this choice lay in the fact that exploration and combat were one and the same. There were no complicated menus or intrusive interfaces. Everything was immediate, intuitive, physical. To progress, the player had to learn to observe the world around them carefully, understand which weapon to use in each situation, and constantly experiment. Cutting down a tree could open a new path, but also reveal a hidden enemy. Using the chain to cross a ravine was both an act of exploration and survival. It was a game that turned curiosity into a form of combat. The limited inventory added another layer of strategy. It wasn't possible to carry an infinite number of items or weapons, so every choice mattered. Deciding what equipment to keep meant carefully planning your moves, anticipating dungeon difficulties, and managing resources wisely. Healing items were also scarce, which contributed to a constant sense of tension. Every encounter, even against a minor enemy, could make the difference between life and death. In an era when many games tended to be forgiving, Mystic Quest was surprisingly severe. It didn't brutally punish mistakes, but it made you feel them. It forced you to reflect, adapt, and improve. An often underestimated aspect is the precision of the controls. The protagonist responded directly to commands without lag or uncertainty. Every hit, every movement had weight and rhythm. This gave the player a sense of total control, making battles not only strategic but also physically satisfying. Hitting an enemy wasn't an automatic animation, but a concrete action. You had to position yourself, assess the distance, choose the right moment. It was a system that, though seemingly simple, required concentration and skill. The game's difficulty also stemmed from intelligent enemy design. They weren't just mere obstacles to eliminate. Each presented a different challenge. Some reacted to the player's movements, others launched projectiles or used magic that forced a change in strategy. Many dungeons featured enemies arranged in such a way as to force the use of the right weapons at the right time. For example, a group of bats in a narrow room could only be easily eliminated with the chain, while armored enemies required close-range, precise strikes with the sword. This level of variety was unthinkable on the Game Boy, and helped keep the gameplay fresh and stimulating. The real-time combat, however, was not an end in itself. It had strong narrative and symbolic value. The protagonist's constant struggle against the hostile world reflected his journey of liberation and growth. Every victory was not just a step forward in the story, but a personal affirmation, a former slave learning to master his own destiny, one blow at a time. The absence of separation between battle and travel gave the feeling that survival was an integral part of the adventure, and not an interlude between dialogues. From a design perspective, Mystic Quest anticipated many ideas that would later become fundamental in modern action RPGs. The fusion of exploration and combat, intelligent inventory management, the connection between weapons and environmental puzzle solving, and the fluid rhythm that alternated tension and discovery. All of this on a monochrome console with a 4 MHz processor and less memory than a modern JPEG image. Despite its success, development was not without its challenges. The team constantly faced memory cuts. Many areas, dialogues, and animations were reduced or eliminated. Some secondary characters, like the mysterious girl who accompanies the hero, had much more elaborate dialogue in the Japanese version, which was simplified in the Western versions due to space constraints. Localization was also rushed. The title Mystic Quest in Europe and North America caused confusion with the similarly named Final Fantasy Mystic Quest for SNES, which was actually a completely different game. A branding error that still causes misunderstandings among collectors and fans of the series today. One of the most fascinating aspects of Mystic Quest is its silent identity. The protagonist, in fact, doesn't have an official name in the original version. The game simply presents him as a young gladiator, a hero without a past, forced to fight for survival. However, in the Japanese manuals of the time, a name appears: Sumo. A curious, simple, almost anonymous moniker, but one that would eventually become a kind of implicit tradition for the most attentive fans. Sumo is not the perfect hero, nor a warrior destined for glory. He is a boy fleeing slavery who, almost by chance, is drawn into a mission greater than himself. This humanity, this underlying vulnerability, makes him different from the classic archetypes of those years. He is a protagonist who doesn't just save the world, he traverses it, endures it, and is transformed by it. A trait that anticipates the more mature and melancholic tone that would characterize the Mana saga in the years to come. At the center of his adventure stands the Tree of Mana, a symbol of life and balance, guardian of the energy that permeates the entire game's universe. In Mystic Quest, the Tree of Mana is not just a narrative element. It is the very heart of the mythology, the sacred object around which everything revolves, from the plot to the philosophy of the game world. This simple but powerful image would become the spiritual core of the entire Seiken Densetsu series. From Secret of Mana on Super Nintendo to Trials of Mana and beyond, the Tree of Mana would remain a fixed point, an emblem of natural balance and sacrifice, a symbol of how life and magic are inseparable. Everything originates here, on a small monochromatic screen, from a story that spoke of loss, rebirth, and hope. But despite its connection to a new universe, Mystic Quest doesn't forget its roots. The game is filled with direct quotes and references to Final Fantasy, demonstrating that for Square, the two sagas were still closely intertwined. Among the prairies and villages of the game, one can encounter chocobos, the adorable large bird-like creatures that fans of the series know well, used as a means of transport. Moogles also make an appearance, small winged beings who have become icons of the Square world. And when you win a battle, the classic victory fanfare is always present. That same melody that in Final Fantasy marked every success. These details, now considered small Easter eggs, at the time served to provide continuity and familiarity, a way of telling players that even if they were exploring a different world, they were still in the greater Square universe. It was a reassuring gesture, but also a way to build a narrative and conceptual bridge between Final Fantasy and what would become a new series, with its own voice and its own language. Koichi Ishii, the creative mind behind Mystic Quest, would always look back at this game with a mixture of affection and self-criticism. In several interviews, he would call it an imperfect but necessary experiment. According to him, Mystic Quest represented a laboratory, a testing ground to understand how to merge action and real-time narration. The goal was not only to make the game more dynamic, but also more physical. Ishii wanted the player to feel every hit, every movement, as part of a living, tangible experience. And although the technical limitations of the Game Boy did not allow for the full realization of that vision, Mystic Quest still managed to demonstrate that an RPG could be told not only through text and turns, but also through gesture, reaction, and movement. In a sense, the game was the spark that would then illuminate the entire philosophy of the Mana series. Not to tell magic, but to make the player experience it. Many years later, in 2003, Mystic Quest came back to life in a new form, completely reimagined for the Game Boy Advance, with the title Sword of Mana. This was not a simple re-release, but a true remake, built from scratch with colorful graphics, an orchestral soundtrack, and completely expanded dialogues. The atmosphere, more vibrant and fairy tale-like, reflected the maturation of the Mana brand and Ishii's more romantic and spiritual vision. The remake deepened the characters, added nuances to their relationships, and introduced a second gameplay perspective, that of Fuji, the priestess destined to protect the Tree of Mana. It was as if, 12 years later, Square wanted to restore Mystic Quest to its true face, that of a story of love, loss, and destiny, finally told with the sensibility and technology it deserved. There's something extraordinary about Mystic Quest's ability to evoke emotions with so little. It had no colors, no voice acting, yet it managed to convey adventure, solitude, and wonder. Every pixel was carefully crafted, every musical note designed to amplify the player's imagination. It was a game that asked you to see beyond the screen, to complete with your mind what technology couldn't show. And perhaps that's why so many remember it fondly, because like a good book, it left room for imagination. Looking back, Mystic Quest isn't just a title from the past, it's the root from which an entire philosophy of game design sprouted. An experience that united simplicity with depth, melancholy with adventure, technique with poetry. In an era when the Game Boy seemed too small for epic dreams, Square showed that even a black and white world could contain colorful emotions. And with that, our journey into the past comes to an end. How many of these curiosities did you already know? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Thanks for watching Retro Legends, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay retro, stay legends.